Chapter 19 Gostimir's Secret. Perhaps I have been wrong. Perhaps it is not reunion with Tatiana that will bring my escape. Perhaps it is a replacement. Can I find another champion to govern this realm in my stead? But I must take care not to show weakness. I must take care not to show reluctance. No one must know how hollow I feel, how empty my omnipotence really is in the absence of satisfaction. My immortal, eternal image as the ruler of this dominion must never come into question until I find a suitable heir to take my place. Rowan leaned over Navarra's shoulder. You should put that book away. We keep falling behind. How about I lead Juniper and you can sit behind me? No, I've got this. Navarra stashed the tome back into her pack, tightened the reins, and kicked her horse into a smooth gait. Davian had told them Berez was 36 miles from Kresik if they followed the road. Time was pressing since they had accepted Strahd's invitation. None of them was ready to meet the Count again, but they knew they could not refuse him. They also knew it would be their chance, possibly their only chance, to see the inside of Castle Ravenloft. Seeing the vampire in his own element was something they could not pass up. They rode hard. In just 4 days they would be dining with Strahd, and they needed to reach Berez by nightfall. That was why Navarra wanted to decipher as much of the tome as she could. She wanted to know her enemy. But when they arrived in Berez, she would need to focus on the real enemy, Keithlin. Baba Lysaga must know where Mother Night lived. Half their journey was taken up by traveling back along the Svalich road toward Vallaki. When they came to the Luna River crossroads, Rowan transformed into a horse so she could carry Irina. With each horse bearing the weight of only one rider, Navarra felt confident they would reach Berez in time. But after 7 miles, the horses balked, shying away from something ahead. To their right, the mists thinned just enough for them to see a sepulchral castle looking down from atop a high hill. Henry and Navarra urged their horses forward. Suddenly, swooping down from the sky, flew a ghostly dragon. The silver beast soared across the field to their right, landing on one of the castle's spires. Juniper reared, but Navarra kept her seat and turned the animal in a tight circle to calm her down. Out of nowhere came an army of phantasmal men in armor with spears and shields. They ran through Navarra and the others, passing over their bodies like an ethereal wind. The army ran toward the castle and clashed with a spectral legion of elves that materialized from the mists. The sounds of battle were distant, even though the fighting was all around them. The dragon stretched its enormous wings and looked as though it was about to blow fire. But then, the dragon, along with the soldiers, vanished, moments later when a thick fog engulfed them. Navarra and the others did not wait around for the ghosts to return. They galloped down the road, slowing only when they thought the castle was far behind. Heading south along the grassy trail, they asked each other what the phantoms could mean. Strahd's tome had mentioned there being a dragon when he came to Barovia with his army. Navarra was curious about the dragon, and assumed it might be related to the ghost they had just seen. She wondered what stories those ghosts at the castle could tell. But it would have to wait. Find Lysaga, find the Martikov's gem, find the Fanes. That was their mission now. They followed the Luna River for several more miles as daylight slipped from the dreary sky. The grass path turned to marsh, the trail dissolving into soggy earth with tall reeds and stagnant water. Scattered about the sodden ground were the remains of old peasant cottages. A few derelict scarecrows watched them with vacant faces. Then Navarra saw it. Across the river was a circle of towering stones. She hopped off Juniper and stood by the edge of the water. A shiver went up her spine, and suddenly she felt as though she was being watched. The feeling had come before, back on the road when they were on their way to the winery, and again when they left Kresik. Was someone following them? She looked around and saw nothing but the shadows of ruined hovels in the gloom. Irina asked Henry if he could fly them over the river to the other side. He shook his head, saying he wouldn't be able to carry the horses. When Rowan transformed back into an elf, Henry asked her if she could turn into a fish big enough to swim them across. But she flatly refused to plunge into that black water. Besides, she did not think she could carry the horses either, even if she were a polar bear. Meanwhile, Navarra took out the tome and flipped to a section she had read earlier. The cryptic notes described the formula of a spell, and Navarra began reading its incantation. As she said the arcane words, she placed a foot on the surface of the river. Then she shifted all her weight, standing firmly on top of the water. While the others were still discussing, she stashed the tome away, then chanted the spell again under her breath, waving her hands in the direction of her friends. "Come on, everyone," she called to them, walking toward the standing stones. "I've made it so we can all walk across, even the horses." Henry was the first to follow. "I didn't think you knew this kind of spell," he said, leading Snowflake across and looking down at his feet as he went. "Oh, you know," she said, "I'm always learning new things." They all made it to the other side, and Navarra looked up at the 20-foot-tall stones. The menhirs stood at regular intervals, forming a circle that was much larger than the wood fane at the windmill. Henry walked along the edge, counting his steps and measuring the distance. "Can you consecrate it?" Navarra asked as he circled back. "I think so." He walked around the fane again, sprinkling each stone with holy water and saying a prayer as he went. "How do we know if it worked?" Navarra asked when he tucked away 4 empty vials. Henry closed his eyes as if meditating. "I can feel it. It worked." "Yes, yes, yes!" Navarra chanted, throwing her arms up in celebration, not caring how silly she looked in front of her friends. "We still have a long way to go," Rowan said, "with 2 other fanes to consecrate, and we only have 2 vials of holy water left." "Henry can make more," Irina said. "Right?" "That will take some time," he said. "And we still have no idea where the 3rd fane is," Rowan added. "And we still need to find the last item in the prophecy, a symbol of great hope." "First, we need to find Babali Saga," Navarra said, squinting her eyes and looking back across the river through the failing twilight at the ruined town. Herkomoid's head peered around her shoulder as he mimicked his master and surveyed their surroundings with narrowed eyes. "First, we need to get some sleep," said Henry. "First, we need to address that woman over there," Irina said, pointing behind one of the menhirs. Rowan and Navarra jumped. Out from behind the stone came a woman with dark skin and twisting tattoos across her face. A serpent slithered over her shoulders and into the pouch at her side. "I've seen you," Navarra said to the woman. "In Valaki, at the Blue Water Inn." The woman inclined her head and walked over to them. "My name's Muriel Vinshaw," she said. "I've seen you too. You were the 4 who overthrew Baron Valakovich." Then she looked Henry up and down. "That armor looks like someone beat the hell out of it. My husband could repair it for you. He's Valaki's blacksmith." Rowan eyed her with suspicion. "But who are you really? What are you doing here?" "I'm a member of the Keepers of the Feather," Muriel said.
I come to Berez often to keep an eye on the Lady of the Swamp, but I'm here now because Davian told me to come."
Their hesitation toward Muriel faded as they talked. She told them of her loyalty to the Martikovs and hatred for Baba Lysaga. She even transformed, appearing as a large crow with bird claws for hands and feet. She was a were-raven. Rowan was still cautious, but Navarra trusted her. Before they went to sleep, Muriel told them the sad tale of Berez and its destruction, which matched the journal entry in Strahd's tome. The vampire had flooded the entire town because the burgomaster, Ulrich, and the priest killed a girl named Marina.
"There's even a monument at the edge of town dedicated to the girl," Muriel said. "From what I know, they killed her because they feared Strahd would turn her, and, as everyone knows, to be turned is a fate worse than death."
Navarra held Herkomoid in her arms, listening as Muriel told them about the abandoned village.
"No one lives here now except her," Muriel said. "Baba Lysaga. She has a hut in the center of town where she spends most of her time torturing the ravens that she captures. But I've seen her attacking other creatures, animals, and people. Instead of a broomstick, she uses a huge giant's skull to fly around and rain down spells on her victims."
Navarra asked Muriel many questions about the hag, but she knew little other than that Lysaga was very dangerous. Muriel could only stress that the hag's power was beyond anything the were-ravens could handle. That night they slept in the consecrated circle. Once Navarra saw that every eye was closed, she took out her candle and summoned Gostimir. He appeared with a pop. Navarra stood up, beaming at him, proud of her accomplishment.
"I did it,"
she said.
"Well, Henry did the consecrating, but we made it. It took us only a day of riding to get here. Golly, these stones are tall. I didn't realize it would be so much bigger than the wood fane. Henry knew exactly how many vials to use. He said a few words, sprinkled the water, and here we are, consecrated ground. We also met that woman over there, Muriel. She's a keeper of the feather. She's been telling us about... Hey, what are you doing?"
Gostimir had a grin on his face bigger than Navarra's. He circled around her, hands behind his back, placing his feet on the ground with cat-like precision. Navarra giggled.
"Whatever are you doing? Are you listening to me? I was saying that Muriel..."
She stopped, and her eyes went wide. Gostimir lifted a strand of her hair and sniffed it.
"What are you... what?"
Navarra reached down and touched him. She startled, but then put her hand on his smooth face.
"Gostimir!"
She threw her arms around him, and he picked her up and spun her round so her legs dangled in the air.
"Gostimir, I can't believe it,"
she said into his ear, feeling his blonde hair tickle her nose.
"You're actually here."
In the whirl of excitement, Navarra kissed him. His warm lips sent a quiver of joy surging through her pounding heart. Then, realizing what she was doing, she pulled back abruptly.
"Oh dear, I'm so sorry,"
she said, unable to look him in the eyes. "I don't mind," he said with a hint of eagerness. She looked up at the Fae as snowflakes danced around his beaming face. She saw his eyes, like evergreens on white mountains, verdant and unchanging throughout the seasons. His lips parted, and he spoke. "You can do it again if you want." Navarra embraced him, pressing her lips to his, melting further into his arms the more he kissed her back. She acknowledged then the hidden longing she'd had for him, pent up and tucked away, because he was always out of reach. But no more. They swayed back and forth, letting their kisses linger a while longer before Navarra pulled back. "I've been waiting a long time," Gostimir said, as they held hands, their fingers interlaced.
"You knew," she said. "You knew if we consecrated the fanes, you could be with me. Why didn't you tell me?"
Gostimir grinned. Of course, he liked surprises.
"Does this mean you're free now?"
she asked. Not yet. The curse hasn't been broken. I can only be here with you in the Fane because this is the Fey Wild.
We're not in the Shadowfell anymore.
Not in this circle.
Will it be like that with the other Fanes, once we consecrate them?
Yes.
Oh, Gostimir, I never want to leave.
But she knew she must, to break the curse and be with him forever. She hugged him again, then gasped.
Oh no! What am I going to tell Vasily?
Pish-posh! Gostimir waved his hand. Don't worry about that wet blanket.
Oh, I even gave him a lock of my hair as a keepsake.
Navarra, you didn't, Gostimir said, holding her at arm's length. You know what I've told you about scrying? Navarra laughed.
Really, Gostimir, it's just Vasily. Don't be silly. As if he would give my hair to anyone who could cast magic.
But as she thought about the young gentleman in Vallaki, a pang of guilt stabbed her. She pushed it away to deal with later, not wanting to spoil a single moment with Gostimir. Well, Gostimir said, at least no one can scry on you in the Fanes.
Because we're not in the Shadowfell?
Gostimir nodded. Here, you and your friends are safe. Navarra and her patron sat down in the grass away from the others, silent, content to hold and be held by one another. It felt so natural to be wrapped around him, as though they had been in each other's arms many times before. As Navarra rested her head in Gostimir's lap, she looked up into a clear sky, devoid of mist and shadows. She saw the stars and noticed that a group of them made the outline of a dragon. Then she remembered the ghosts they had passed on the road. She told Gostimir about the castle, the army, and the dragon.
I still don't know if they were actual ghosts or just illusions, she said.
Gostimir caressed her cheek with his hand.
If you saw Argynvost, then it was probably just an illusion, although I can't be sure where his spirit is now.
Navarra sat up.
The dragon's name is Argynvost?
Why, yes. The castle you passed sounds like Argynvostholt, but the dragon who lived there died long ago.
And how do you know that?
Because the silver dragon was still reigning when I grew up here, although back then it wasn't called Barovia. It was called Argynvale after him. Navarra's eyes bulged.
When were you going to tell me you lived here?
You know how these things are, he said jovially. Besides, I assumed you knew.
You told me you had been here, but you never mentioned this was your home.
Gostimir booped her nose with his.
You're really something, you know that.
She grabbed his head and pulled him in for another kiss. Then she sat back and brushed his long hair with her fingers.
Navarra, there's something I need to tell you,
Gostimir said. There was a strain of sorrow in his voice. The sudden change in his tone made Navarra feel cold. She had never heard him speak that way.
What is it?
She asked.
Lysaga is my daughter.
Navarra stopped stroking the braid by his ear.
I was afraid to tell you, he said.
He looked at the ground, tearing up a blade of grass.
I had no control over what I did when I was with Keithlen. She held me enchanted by her powers for years, but I still feel ashamed. When you said Lysaga was here in Barovia, I didn't know what to say. I thought she had died long ago. But if she is still alive, I can't imagine how powerful she must be. She's evil, Navarra. I tried everything to help her, but Keithlen, she twisted Lysaga to her own will.
He looked up at Navarra.
At first a swell of anger, confusion, even jealousy rose in Navarra's chest, but as she stared back, his kind eyes struck her to the core, and all the hurtful feelings faded away. She cared for no one as much as she cared for Gostimir, and she wanted him to know that.
If Baba Lysaga is your daughter, then she has part of you in her.
Navarra said it with sympathy.
I can talk with her, try negotiating. Maybe we can help her.
Navarra, Gostimir said, resting his forehead on hers. Whatever goodness she was born with died a long time ago. She's a creature much older than Strahd. I fear to think what she's become after centuries of hate. Do what you think is best when you confront her, but don't hesitate to kill her if you must. I can't bear to lose you. Navarra nestled up to him, resting her head on his shoulder.
Don't worry about me. I've learned from the best.
She fell asleep on his lap, feeling a couple snowflakes drop to her cheek. When she woke up a few hours later, Gostimir was gone, and sitting in his place was a bouquet of vibrant wildflowers. There were actually 2 bouquets shoved together at the stems, making the arrangement look like an hourglass with tufts of petals sticking up at the bottom and top. Navarra held the colorful gift to her chest, burying her face in the flowers and smelling the fragrant aroma.
And I feel powerful, more powerful than I ever have,
Rowan was saying to Henry and Irina at the other end of the fane.
It must be the magic of the standing stones.
The druid turned to Navarra when she came up to them.
I can see by that grin you must have had a good night too. What's that you're holding? I think I'm in love,
Navarra sighed.
Here we go,
Rowan smirked.
I'm sure Vasily will be happy to hear that, said Irina. Are you going to tell him when you see him next? Not him, Gostimir, Navarra said. Henry, Rowan, you guys were right. I don't know why I didn't see it before. Gostimir is the best. But guess what else?
Navarra told them about Gostimir's appearance in the fane, and that within the standing stones they were in the Fey Wild. Her face grew sad when she explained her patron's relationship to Lysaga, and then told them that she didn't want to kill the hag anymore. Well, Navarra, Henry said, this is your call. We'll follow your lead this time. Just remember, we still need to find that gem, but we're fully behind you. Rowan and Irina agreed, and the 4 of them devised a plan to confront Baba Lysaga, with Navarra as their captain. They set out, walking back across the Luna River. Muriel stayed behind, leading Snowflake and Juniper away from the circle to hide in a nearby thicket. She and the horses had disappeared in the mist by the time they reached the far shore. The fog was dense as they walked through the old town. All was quiet, except the buzzing of insects and the croaking of bullfrogs, until they approached a ramshackle wooden hut built on a rotting tree stump. 2 iron cages hung near the doorway like hideous ornaments, each one holding a mass of ravens that squawked and batted their wings when they saw the newcomers. Rowan transformed into a cat right before the door of the hut cracked open.
"Who are you?"
said a harsh voice from behind the door.
"Hello, I'm Navarra. I'm here with some friends. Are you Baba Lysaga?"
"I am,"
said the voice.
"Nice to meet you. We came to ask you some questions about Mother Night."
The door opened wide, and a tall crone with long hair and terrifying aquiline features looked down on them with a scowl. Wisps of grey hair fluttered in mid-air, as though she were floating in water.
"Are you friends of Lord Strahd?"
the crone asked through shriveled lips. Her skin was as dried and wrinkled as a mummified corpse.
"Yes," Navarra lied. "We are friends of Strahd."
Baba Lysaga looked the elf up and down, then held the door open to them all.
Good. Come in, friends of Strahd.
Navarra and the others stepped into the cramped space. It was a single room with a bed, a table, and 2 cabinets. It would have appeared normal if the bathtub in the corner wasn't stained red, and if there wasn't an animated cradle rocking in the center of the room. Navarra inched closer and peered into the crib, seeing a sleeping baby. Rowan stood up on her hind legs and sniffed the child's face. There was a faint glimmer coming from the babe that made Navarra wonder if it was an illusion.
"What's the baby's name?"
Navarra asked, trying to hide her concern. She briefly saw Rowan sneak out of sight. The crone hunched over the crib, her voice rising an octave.
My baby? Why, this is Strahd.
You named your child after Count Strahd? Henry asked.
No, you fool. This is Count Strahd von Zarevich. I am his mother.
Navarra, Henry, and Irina shared a look of unease. But Count Strahd lives in Castle Ravenloft, Henry said. Navarra just told you we're his friends.
Yes, and?
Lysaga asked, as if she didn't see the problem.
Are you saying that your baby is the same Count Strahd who lives in Castle Ravenloft?
Irina asked.
Of course.
There was an aura to the child, and as Navarra looked closely, she could see that the baby had translucent features. It was an illusion spell.
Are you Queen Ravenovia, then?
Navarra asked, remembering what she had read in the tome. Strahd named his castle Ravenloft after her, his mother.
That horrid woman!
Lysaga cried.
Ravenovia called me nursemaid, but I was his mother. He drank from my breasts, slept in my arms. I watched him. I took care of him. I would sing songs to him in his crib.
She pointed to the fake baby. Green wisps of smoke trickled from her finger and swirled around the babe.
I gave him the spark of magic. I knew one day he would be great, and I made sure of it. But that Queen Ravenovia drove me out. She said I wasn't allowed to sing to her baby. My baby!
Without taking her eyes from the illusion, she asked,
But you say you wanted to talk about Mother Night. Are you not worshippers of the goddess?
We'd like to know more about her, so we can pay her proper devotion.
Navarra was a bad liar, but saw no other option to get the hag to talk.
What can you tell us about her?
Lysaga's eyes locked on Navarra, and the warlock felt just as transparent as the baby in the crib.
If you are followers of Mother Night, then you should already know how to serve her.
We only wondered where we could find Mother Night,
Navarra said, hoping that Rowan had searched the hut and found the gem so they could follow their plan and leave. Baba Lysaga licked her lips, then went to one of the cabinets and opened a cage that held a single raven. The bird screeched as the hag snatched it.
Are you one of those pesky were-ravens?
She asked the bird. It squawked and struggled to be free.
Those dreadful keepers of the feather are always trying to sabotage my little boy. I'll capture every last raven in the world if I have to.
Then she put the bird to her mouth and bit off its head. She crunched and chewed, her mouth a mess of blood and feathers. When she finally swallowed, Irina gagged.
Any worshipper of Mother Night should know where Mother Night lives,
Baba Lysaga said, not bothering to wipe her face.
We're very ignorant of certain things,
Navarra said, trying to hold down the bile rising in her throat.
That's why we came here to ask you, so that we could honor the night goddess properly. And, as you know, we are friends of your son."
Just then she felt a soft tail brush against her leg, and Rowan meowed 2 times. That was a signal. The druid had found the gem but wasn't able to obtain it. At the sound of the meowing, Herkomoid came out of Navarra's pack with a necklace of orc's teeth in his mouth. Navarra was glad she had brought the trinket, a trophy from her first fight against the monster in Herringon. Navarra took the teeth and held them out.
"I'd like to go to the fane first, to place these at the stones. I want to please Keithlin of the crooked teeth."
The hag, who had been sucking the blood from the raven's body, stopped.
"You know her true name," she said in disbelief.
"I may be ignorant of some things," Navarra said, "but my devotion drives me to know everything about the goddess. I also know that you are closer to Mother Night than anyone. It would be an honor if you came to the fane with us."
Navarra wanted to rush out the door right then and there, feeling like the hag's lair itself was an oppressive cage, but she stood firm and waited for Baba Lysaga's decision. The hag chewed up the remains of her feathered snack, licking her fingers after pushing the raven's legs into her mouth.
"I think I will go with you,"
she said at last, opening the door. Navarra and the others hurried out of the hut and watched Lysaga grab another raven, this time from one of the cages outside. The other birds screeched and rattled their iron bars. But Baba Lysaga ignored their cries and climbed into the giant's skull by the door. The skull lifted off the ground and took off toward the river. Walking behind everyone else, Navarra secretly pulled out the tome and cast the water walk spell on herself and her friends. When they met up with the hag inside the fane, Baba Lysaga landed and stepped out of the skull. Once the hag came near, Navarra placed the teeth necklace at the base of one of the stones. Henry, Irina, and Navarra stood back and watched.
"I know why you're so close to Mother Night," Navarra said. "You're her daughter."
"Who are you?"
The hag glared at her.
"Someone who's devoted to a cause," Navarra said. "Will you tell me where I can find Mother Night?"
"Just say her name and she hears you. That's all that is needed to find her."
The hag's bloody mouth and wispy floating hair was disquieting, but Navarra needed to believe there was hope for this creature.
"What about your father?"
Navarra asked, with a tentative step toward the hag.
"Do you remember him?"
"My father left me hundreds and hundreds of years ago."
"Do you want to see him again?"
"Yes,"
Baba Lysaga said with a hunger.
"I want to see him. And when I do, I will break his worthless body. That worm abandoned me and mother."
"No,"
said Navarra in distress.
"He didn't want to abandon you. Gostimir wanted to help you."
Gostimir, yes, that was his name. Gostimir. He never loved mother. He tried to take me from her. But I serve only Mother Night. I have her power, and if I see my father again, I'll kill him, that bastard, fool, wretch, putrid filth. I'll plunge my hands into his chest and rip his heart out."
The raven in Baba Lysaga's hands was torn apart, its guts flinging in every direction. Navarra screamed,
"Never!"
The warlock shot a blast of eldritch energy, hitting the hag full in the stomach. Baba Lysaga merely grimaced, then cast a curse. Pointing a finger at Navarra, she discharged a jet of sizzling yellow acid. Navarra dodged and fired off another blast. Lysaga deflected it with a shield spell and ran to her giant skull. Irina and Henry rushed to stop her from lifting off the ground. They both jumped and grabbed the lip of the bull-like vehicle as it rose into the air. It swayed wildly, trying to shake them off. Irina tumbled onto the grass, but Henry held on tight and tried to climb in as the skull drifted higher. Lysaga's ugly face appeared over the rim. Then, with her staff, she smacked him on the head. Once, twice. As she made to hit him again, Henry released his grip and plummeted to the ground. He landed with a crunch. Before the knight could stand, a ball of fire descended from the hag's hand and engulfed the entire circle of standing stones in scorching flames. Everyone dove to the ground, covering their faces. Almost immediately, another incendiary rained down upon them. But this time, Rowan met it with fire magic of her own, and the two spells exploded above their heads in a raging inferno. Navarra rolled onto her back and took careful aim. The moment the flames cleared, a bolt of green streaked upward. It struck true. The blast lifted Baba Lysaga out of the skull. She fell through the air and crashed to the earth. Henry was ready to greet the hag with Apollo's gleaming blade when she scrambled to her feet. But she parried his thrust with her staff and extended a finger toward his chest. There was a pulse, like the beating of an invisible drum, and Henry's face contorted in agony. He collapsed, unconscious. Irina screamed. She charged, but a wave of Lysaga's hand sent her smashing against one of the menhirs. Just then, a green flash caught Lysaga's shoulder and spun her round. The next spell knocked her down. Navarra's face was flint as she closed in on the hag, blasting again and again. Baba Lysaga tried to stand, but every blast made it impossible. Lying on her back, she lifted a finger at the warlock and muttered a curse. Again, there was a thump like a drum, and searing pain coursed through Navarra's body. Before she had time to cry out, everything faded to black.
"Good, drink it,"
Muriel said, as another explosion of fire roared past. Navarra realized there was still a fight raging around them. The were-raven must have dragged her to relative safety behind one of the monoliths. Navarra did not bother asking questions. She drank from the small flask that Muriel held to her lips. Then she stood up and peered out from behind the stone. She raised a hand at the hag, who was once again attempting to climb into the giant skull. Navarra's head was throbbing, and her vision blurred, but she blasted anyway. Her spells went wild, and she blinked her eyes. Just as Baba Lysaga was lifting into the sky again, an enormous white wolf, twice the size of Rowan's usual form, leaped over the skull and ripped the hag from her seat. As they fell, the hag flared out her fingers, and acid splashed in the wolf's face. It stumbled back, yelping and pawing at its eyes. Lysaga then staggered to her feet, gripping the side of the skull for support. Now she wheeled on the warlock, lifting her staff and rasping through grinning teeth. Navarra struggled to conjure another spell, but the world was spinning around her. Blackness threatened to close in again. Lysaga extended a finger toward her and began speaking a curse. The words were almost complete when the hag's jaw fell open. A sword blade had erupted from her chest. She swayed drunkenly. Then her eyes rolled back, her hair went limp, and she pitched face first into the grass. Irina stood behind her, still holding the bloody sword. Navarra exhaled and slumped down beside a monolith. Kicking the wretched body, Irina checked to make sure it was really dead. The giant wolf transformed into Rowan and walked over to Henry, who was sitting by another stone, conscious now and rubbing his head. Muriel was offering him the last drops from her flask. It was over. They could go back to the hut and retrieve the gem for the Martikovs. But Navarra still did not know where to find Mother Night.